to present to you some best practice tips and suggestions from one of our top surveyors, Russ Lugo. Russ Lugo is able to achieve a very, very high level of quality combined with a very, very high level of productivity with days in which he's able to complete 30 or more surveys in a relatively short period of time. Russ, you're on the call now as well, and I just want to ask you, you've been with us now for at least about 6 months with the Crossroads Group, and what would you say your average rate of surveys per hour is? If you average in a given week, how many hours do you put in, and how many surveys are you able to do in that week?
The past couple of weeks, I've been averaging just right at the 125 per week, and that's probably with about 5 to 6 hours a day of surveys.
Mm-hmm. So would you say about 20 hours a week, maybe a little more?
Yes, just a little more than that.
Okay. So if it was 5 hours a day nonstop, that would be 25 hours. So you're averaging would you say 5 surveys per hour, or maybe a little more than that?
Just a little more than that.
Yeah.
On average, a typical day.
5 to 6 surveys, we'll say. And Russ is able to do this with a very, as I mentioned earlier, very high QA scores from our QA person, and very great quality and high client satisfaction. I've gone over his results with the client, and they've been extremely pleased with the work he's done. And it's been a new client, and they were real happy with it. So Russ is going to, for the benefit of surveyors who are looking for some new ideas, he's going to share some of his best practice tips, and I'm going to make him the presenter. So I'm going to give him screen control and let him take it away. Now, Russ, there's a button at the top there on your screen that will say Show My Screen. When you do that, your screen will actually show up here on this recording. There it is. Perfect. All right. Well, feel free, Russ. Go ahead and share kind of your approach to completing surveys.
Excellent. Thank you for the opportunity. And a couple areas that I would recommend and encourage just to help keep consistency and quality all across the different surveys that you would do. One is to maximize your dialing time and to minimize the lag between either a no answer or reaching voicemail or reaching a message that's pre-recorded saying the phone number is not in service. To avoid lag time through all of those, I would always go into my phone number column, and as I'm going through doing my random sampling, I would right-click and then just copy-paste the next number that would be in queue, and while the current number is dialing, I would have that number ready on my clipboard, and as soon as I reached my maximum number of rings, or as soon as I reached a voicemail or a no longer working number, I would just go ahead and terminate that call, but immediately paste in the new number that was already on my clipboard while the dialing was taking place and start initiating the next call, and then go down to my next number in my random sampling and again copy that number and be prepared to input it unless somebody answers and is ready. So that way I'm always ready with the next number.
Yeah, you minimize the time between ending the call, the previous attempt, and starting the new one. How many times do you let it ring, Russ, that ring?
On average, 4, roughly 4 to 5, depending.
Yes, and if I could just add a suggestion to all surveyors, I would test the number of rings that you hear on your end with the number of rings on the receiving end by calling your cell phone one time, just so you can see if there's any lag, because sometimes you'll hear it ring 5 times, but maybe the person on the other end only heard it 3 times.
That's a good point. That's true.
Yeah.
And then some thoughts as you engage with people, because once an individual answers and you've identified them as the individual that you want to be surveying, There's always a couple nuances that I include just to be sure that the individual will actually stay engaged throughout the call. One thing that I try to avoid is early hang-ups. Somebody who said they're willing to do it, and then partly through or almost at the end, they tend to hang up because they're actually pretty busy. They realized, they didn't really want to be a part of a survey halfway through, and so essentially you've not had a complete survey. So the goal is to get as many complete surveys as you can with a lot of detail. So if I hear a lot of background noise, children in the background, or they seem like they're on the go, or their voice just sounds a little bit disinterested, though they've committed to do the survey, I will always reiterate to them, just to reassure you, this will only take about, and I let them know the average number of minutes, and just reconfirm, is that still okay with you? Are you still good on time? And just kind of have a subtle recommitment from them. And then I typically assure everyone, I'll let you know as we progress about how much we've covered and how much is left. And I do that pretty much with everybody at midpoint and about 3/4 of the way, just so that they know and can anticipate I might be getting busy, but really this is coming to a close, and they don't feel that they have to terminate the call themselves.
You know what else it does, Russ, as I'm hearing you, is it shows a sensitivity to their time. You're showing that their time is valuable and that you recognize that, and you're showing that sensitivity, and I think people appreciate that.
And then another area I do is also to keep them engaged is as we go through, I typically reiterate their last name, just reiterating Mr. Smith or Miss Smith at least another 3 to 4 times throughout the survey in key areas where it would fit. And the reason I do that is because I want to show them that I'm not just going through the motions and kind of the robotic questions, just feeding those to them, but that I really am making a personalized focus on their experience. And so just at different points as you go through the survey, you can just ask, Mr. Smith, when you did call, how long did it take to reach a person who could schedule your appointment? And there's just a number of questions where you can easily fit their name at the beginning or the end of the question, and it keeps them engaged personally. Or if they have, I'm sorry, go right ahead.
Oh, I just had a question. I'm sorry, Russ. Do you ever thank them if they share some feedback? Do you ever say thank you for sharing that?
Oh, absolutely, and I typically affirm the feedback they've shared by saying that's pretty valuable feedback. That's exactly, the type of information we're looking for. Thank you for that. I'm noting that, and let me reiterate some of that back to you. Definitely want to make sure that they feel affirmed in that.
Mm-hmm. Excellent.
And if it's a child and we're surveying the parent, then I would typically try and fit the child's name in on the questions that are more specific to them. For instance, if it's asking if they've had any, just as an example, any type of goals discussed with them in their past 3 months, I would say goals regarding your child's health. And again, just try and make it a very personalized or specific focus.
Okay, that's great. Russ, can I ask you a question as well? I noticed that you're sampling there every 5th patient, and you're very, very good at balancing the provider sample size. So each provider has an equivalent sample size, and you follow everything very well. Can you tell us a little more about how you are able to achieve that balanced by provider sample size?
Yes, when I get my counts from my project manager, what I do at the start of each week is I print those out, and then I note who are the providers that are actually the lowest, or who are the ones that have some gaps. And what I'll do is I'll just actually make a goal and go through and target those specifically on my printout, and I just keep a track of what that number is so that everybody kind of comes up by the end of the week to be just about average.
Yeah, excellent, excellent. Thank you, Russ. And then as you're sampling, you're pretty good at getting an even distribution as you go down the list. So you sample the same number per provider as you're going down once they're even?
Yes, that's correct. At the beginning and then towards the end, once everybody's even, I just go by provider and just go down that list and just basically hit every 1 or every 2 that's needed per provider.
Okay, thank you.
And then something else to note is, of course, the standard color scheme, the yellow, the red, and the green, yellow being attempted, which you'll note here, that we attempted, but there was no answer, the person was not home, some type of an attempt was made, but not a connection. The red, which indicates that they did not want to, they were not able to continue, or in some cases, it was the wrong phone number, the phone line was truly disconnected, and then of course the green, that it was a completed sample. And these are the required colors. And there are some additional colors that we could begin to use. For instance, if it's a partial survey, meaning someone did go through part of it, but they disconnected at some point, you weren't able to reconnect with them. Halfway through they said, here's my main concerns, I don't have time, something just happened, I've got to go, I've got to take this other call, for whatever reason. You were able to do a portion of it, and you do have some information, though it's not completed, perhaps using a lighter green for some of those versus the darker green. And again, the standard colors are the darker green, the red, and the yellow, but this would be a variation to that, just to note that it was a partially completed survey. Or a do not call for the reds would be a darker red, a very dark red. And of course, if you ever get a do not call, someone who specifically requests, take my number off, I don't want to be a part of this, do not call me back, make sure I don't get a second call to this, I've already responded, I've already asked, whatever the case is. In that scenario, marking them with a darker red and immediately going to your main folder and making sure that that phone number is included in the do not call list.
Yes, good point, good point. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And that's not that you're offering to take people off the list. Those are just people that specifically say, please, put me on your do not call list. Or maybe if you have someone that is just totally upset, doesn't want to do the survey, and they're kind of just a loose cannon, and it would be wise not to call that person ever again. In an extreme case, you can also include those people as well.
Absolutely. Another color I use, and these are just personal recommendations, these are not required, I'll just mention that ahead of time, but is a light blue. If somebody says, I really want to do this, I do have some comments, I'm actually driving, or I'm at the store. I've had a number of people say that, can you call me in 30 minutes? And so I'll just continue on sampling for that provider, but know that there's a great potential to come back to that person. So I'll mark them in blue and just typically insert a comment. You can just insert it directly in, and I'll just put in there, call back in 30 minutes. And that'll just let me know as I go back through my list later that I do have a callback, and I'll just call them back. And typically those prove to be really well, and a completed survey as well.
That's great.
And another color I use is gray, which again is just personal use. It's not official, it's not standard, but I use gray to indicate that the person was not necessarily a do not call or a not connected number, but this is a person that somehow is already related to the respondent that was interviewed the first time. So for instance, if you have two children in the same household, and you were able to complete the survey for the first child, but it's the same parent who took the second child on the same date, typically I'll just note that in gray so that I'm not calling the same person either tomorrow or later today as I go back through my roster. And I just note it as gray, indicating they've already been contacted, they're just part of the same household. We don't need to recall them.
Excellent. Good thought, Russ. Very good.
And then just some closing thoughts here in capturing comments. I always probe, of course, on anything that's noted as poor or fair, or if I hear hesitancy in good, if it's not a definite good or excellent, it's kind of hesitant. I typically just ask very open-ended questions. What else could have been better? Would you mind sharing a little more? Was there anything concerning? And then take those notes. And if it is something where it is definitely a concern, I'll immediately scroll down at any portion of the survey and begin to input that into my opportunities section, noting what could have been improved, and put it in with pretty good detail. If it's just something like a passing comment, like this particular nurse was very friendly, I'd like them to be noted, then I'll definitely have a scratch pad next to me and just kind of jot those down by hand and then go and add those side comments later. But if it's anything that's very specific, that's very relevant to a better experience, I'll immediately just go down, I'll notify them, I am taking notes. You may hear silence in the background. It's just me inputting this so that they know I am taking the time to do that, and then I'll come back and say, allow me to ask you a couple more questions just to give some more background to that experience, and then come back to the rest of the survey.
That's excellent. Excellent. Excellent.
And then finally, as we're going through, what I typically do is if my background questions are pretty extensive, like in this survey, for instance, there is quite a bit of background question information as far as the location and the specialty and the type, and so there's a number of questions to fill in afterward. What I'll do at the very beginning of the survey is make sure that I've added the name correctly. So once the respondent answers and they affirm that they're ready to go through, they're willing, I'll just copy-paste their name directly in, but I won't until they commit to the survey. At the very end, when I'm at the very bottom, instead of filling out this whole section, which is pretty lengthy and could be somewhat time-consuming and keep me from getting to my next call that day, what I'll do is after the survey is complete, I'll go back up, I'll double check and make sure it is actually the name, match it up with the roster, the survey is done, and then I'll proceed to my next survey. And what I'll do is at the very end of the day or at some point later in that week, I'll actually go through and match up the name to the roster, and then I'll just go ahead and fill in all of my background questions. And what that does is that ensures quality, that I'm matching the correct information to the correct respondent, but then I'm able to fill in all that background detail later.
Do you find that you're able to fill in that background detail more quickly in doing it in batch like that?
I am, because it's really just data entry and it's just a matter of keystrokes. And so what I do at that point is I'll always double check, even once I've gone through my background questions, I'll actually scan up to the very top and just go through and make sure everything at a glance was exactly correct, including all the way down to the last one. Match it up with everything on the screen a second time. That way it just ensures quality, but it gets you through a lot faster. The key is, though, making sure your name from the roster is at the top before you end that survey and making sure it's correct. So you can come back and correctly fill in the background with the right person.
Excellent, excellent. Excellent. Well, thank you, Russ. Appreciate that. Any other suggestions or tips?
I would say just really enjoy what you're doing. Make sure that you definitely do have some interaction with the respondents. If they make a joke, laugh, enjoy that moment. Definitely just do your best to engage with them on a personal level, but then have your goals before you and just know what you're headed for. I try and make a daily goal, a number of that I'm going to accomplish each day or each week, and I do my best to stick to that so that the process is enjoyable, but it's also productive.
Excellent, excellent. Well, thank you again, Russ. We do appreciate that, and that concludes our presentation of best practice tips for Mr. Russ Lugo. Thank you, Russ.
Thank you.